Our Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us together today.
Okay.
Thank you for letting us hear this marvelous story by Dr. Catherine Meeks. And thank you for preparing her to send this message to us. Please, Lord, open our ears and our hearts to the message that we receive. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen.
Well, welcome everybody. We are so glad to have you on this edition of the St. John's Cathedral Bookstore's edition of BackStory. I'm Sandy Donovan, and I'm director of the programming for the St. John's Bookstore Gift Shop. And I'm just delighted to welcome everybody today. This is so great to our bookstore BackStory conversation with Dr. Catherine Meeks. BackStory is one of our regular programs at the St. John's Cathedral Bookstore. We have several regular ones, and it's under the umbrella, really, of the First Monday Book Club that we started years and years ago. And we just felt like it was just a natural thing it was a natural thing for when we read a good book or before we read a good book to maybe pull an author in and talk about the backstory. What went on? What were you thinking about? What kind of things didn't you get to say that you'd like to say? What would you like for us to focus on as we read this and we kind of interact together? So we offer two other programs that build community and connection. And that, as I've mentioned, is the First Monday Book Club and our Art at Noon Salon, which is our art appreciation program that we endeavor to pull people in to talk about art so that we appreciate it, so that when we walk into that glorious cathedral, we can appreciate all that wonderful stuff that's on the walls. And when we look in the hall, we can do that as well. All of the books we discuss, including the one that is featured today, this is my promo, so everybody just has to take a little breath, are available in the bookstore. And we'd love for you to come in and look the bookstore over and what we've got. And if you can't come in, then we have an avenue of supporting us and supporting the mission of the bookstore, because we definitely have a mission. All of the proceeds go from the bookstore, profits go to the mission of our church and what our church is accomplishing. Last year, we were able to give $5,000 to the backpack ministry, and it's just through the generosity of people supporting our ministry that we can support the ministry of our church. We have spiritual books there, we have religious books, and also we emphasize gifts from the fair trade and the social enterprise of our communities. Just a housekeeping item to get us all started and get us on the same page. Please note that all of the participants today during today's program will be muted. And you're invited, there's a special section that you're invited on Zoom. I hope you know where that is, to submit questions to Dr. Meeks. And you can do that if you want to during that, perhaps while it's something, you think, oh gosh, I'd like to ask her about that, that you'll be able to do that. And then we'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. We're also so pleased today to offer today's program in partnership with the Bishops Institute of the Diocese of Florida. The Institute is directed by the Reverend Canon, and today Dr. Douglas Dupree, Canon, will be introducing our own Dean Kate, and Dean Kate will introduce Dr. Meeks for the interview. So, Dr. Dupree, take it away.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm delighted to be invited to make an introduction. I do have a few words to introduce Dean Kate. I also have a few words that I thought I might, if I can get my oar in, to honor Dr. Meeks, if I may. But to begin with, our Dean, Kate Moorhead Carroll. She has been the dean of our cathedral here in Jacksonville since 2009. She's the 10th dean of this wonderful cathedral. She is a prolific author herself. She has authored over 8 books, and She does a daily morning devotion on YouTube, and she has she does a tremendous work with that daily devotion. From the time of COVID and after, it continues to be a very strong devotional gift to not just the cathedral, but the whole life of the community here in Jacksonville and the diocese. She's a leader and part of the vision that created the Cathedral District, which has to do with the renewal of downtown Jacksonville, the urban core, the renewal of the urban core. She's just done a marvelous piece of work and continues to do for the future in that area. Closer to my heart, Dean Kate, she's been a very active supporter of the Sidney B. Parker chapter of the Union of Black Episcopalians. And the cathedral has been the venue for, over the years, a goodly number of UBE programs. Most recently, last month, the annual Martin Luther King Jr. brunch and speaker event, and all of that through the Dean's warm welcome and hospitality. She is married to Dr. Chris Carroll, a pediatric intensive care doctor. Kate, between you have 6 children. That's a job, a full-time job in itself, in ages from 18 to 24. She's a marvelous dean. She's a gift to the diocese, to the church, and to our community. Dr. Meeks visited the cathedral. She visited our diocese back in 2020, in February of 2020. She did a workshop for the Union of Black Episcopalians and for the Bishops Institute. That was at the cathedral. Dr. Meeks, that visit and your workshop, it's made a strong and it's made a lasting impression on me. I am old enough to have lived through, in my youth, the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and to have had my then young and idealistic imagination very much shaped by it, very much shaped by it. But I must say, we all need to be renewed, and your visit 4 years ago, it really challenged me to think afresh. It kind of engaged my heart and my mind and well, my conscience and my will, all of me. And I had a similar experience when I picked up your book, A Quilted Life. It's had the same kind of clear and forceful effect on me. It's a marvelous book.
Thank you.
I wrote about it. I do a kind of a little monthly e-newsletter for the Bishops Institute, and I wrote about, like Dean Kate preached about it last Sunday. I wrote about it in my February newsletter. And there I said that your book put me in mind of something the Christian apologist G.K. Chesterton wrote about Christian saints. Chesterton defined a saint as someone who will be found restoring the world to sanity by exaggerating whatever the world neglects. And each generation, he said, it seeks its saint by instinct, not necessarily what the people want, but what the people need. And the very first saints were told by their Lord, ye are the salt of the earth, ye are the salt of the earth. And when we say those words to someone, we usually mean by it, you're just the best thing in the world. But Chesterton, he sets that straight. He concludes, he says, Christ didn't tell his apostles that they were the only excellent people, the best people in the world, but he said they were the exceptional people, the permanently incongruous people, And the text about the salt of the earth is as sharp and shrewd and tart as the taste of salt. It's because they were exceptional people that they must not lose their exceptional quality. And the saint, I love that definition of a saint. The salt, ye are the salt of the world. Now, A Quilted Life has been for me salt from the very first page. And I've nearly finished it. And I know, just like your visit 4 years ago, it's going to continue to be salt in my life. And Sandra, I know I'm talking a bit too long, but a final word of introduction. And Dean Kate actually kind of touched on it in something she said earlier. Dr. Meeks, fairly early on in your book, I wasn't surprised at all when you tell us that as a young girl in school, I think you were in the 7th or 8th grade, you discovered a gift for writing. And a short story that you wrote was published in the school newspaper, which is kind of confirmation of that. Well, dear Dr. Meeks, that gift of writing has obviously only grown stronger and stronger over the years. A Quilted Life is many good things, and not least is just a damn beautifully written story. It is beautifully written, and it is a life well told.
Thank you.
Is that good enough, Sandra? Introduction. Okay.
Thank you so much, Douglas. That was beautiful. Dr. Meeks, thank you so much for being with us today and for having the courage to write about your life. I'd like to begin by just asking you, how did the call to write a memoir, an autobiography, how did that come to you? You've published a lot and you've done so much great work in the area of racial justice and healing. How did you feel called by God to write about your life? Where did that instinct come from?
Well, thank you so very much. And thank you everyone for taking this time to show up for this event and to be interested in this conversation. I wrote I Want Somebody to Know My Name some 30 years ago before I was even clear about what my name was. And sort of like Maya Angelou, who discovered that you can't really write your autobiography and be done with it forever because you keep evolving and you want to help people understand how you got from one place to another. I felt very moved at this point in my life to try to help people understand how I got to be this person. Because oftentimes people listen to you and hear you and read you and they think you just kind of sprung up, kind of like springing out of the head of Zeus, you know. And I wanted folks to understand, I wanted to tell the story of the journey, my journey, and with the hope that it would help other people be more encouraged in their own journeys and to realize that you don't just wake up here. You know, I've got these degrees, I've written these books, I'm getting honorary doctorates, I'm doing this, that, and the other. And people look at that and they think it's magic. A lot of people think it's magic. It's not magic. It's day by day, intentionally walking up the hill and sliding down and getting up and walking up again and sliding down and falling off the road and getting back on the road. And I just thought it would be helpful to tell that part of the story so that if you're reading The Night is Long but light comes in the morning, you might think, oh, this woman's so amazing and all these things are so wonderful. You read this and you find out, I learned those things the hard way. You know, those are not just ideas that I sat down somewhere and thought about. These are things that were carved into my soul by the journey that I was embarking, and I wanted to share that. And I did not want to just write a book that's like, oh, I had a rags to riches story. I mean, those are kind of nice, but that was not my intention. my intention was to say, we're here for a reason, we're here with a purpose, and there'll be ups and downs, and that all things ultimately really do work for good, even though all things are not good
Mm.
that happen to you. And you can live to tell about it, and you can live better if you embrace it in honesty and with courage. So there was all of that that pushed me to want to tell this story this way. And then the quilt, of course, is just such a amazing metaphor, because a quilt is made up of all these disparate pieces and stuff we things we've loved and thrown away, part of it, but here's a part we can keep. And isn't that the way life is? Some of our experiences we wish we'd never had, but we did, and they're not going away. And then some are just so delightful. So it it was it was a long process. It wasn't like I just woke up and said, oh, I'm going to write a memoir now. No, well, nothing ever really happens that way for me. It's always kind of a organic moving in a direction and then waking up and finding myself in that place. But it was a process.
Mm. Dr. Meeks, in your book, at the very beginning, you have this wonderful early childhood of innocence at the Walnut Grove. And for me, that was very important, because before all the struggle began, you were loved and held in a kind of a womb-like space between those two houses of your family. Would you talk a little bit about how that's so important in your life story, that safe beginning, I might call it, or rich beginning?
Yes, and it was delightful to even remember that, because I used to, it was really, I don't talk about safe much, but it was a safe space. There was nobody at the end of that road but us.
Mm.
And so to go wandering back and forth as a little kid was no big deal. And being able to be in my aunt's house, I talked about this, my aunt had a feather bed. There's nothing
Mhm.
more
Yeah.
wonderful than a feather bed if you're 5 years old. I don't know that I'd want to sleep on one now. I doubt it seriously. But my aunt had a feather bed, and I just loved going to her house and plopping up down on her feather bed. And she never said anything to me about it. She just, because I messed up her bed, because if you fall in a feather bed, it makes a big dent in it. I was this inquisitive little person, and nobody ever tried to keep me from being inquisitive. So I think I got the message that you really are okay. You really are okay, and you can be anything, without anybody ever saying any of it, because nobody was trying to tell me these are the boundaries. This is the parameter. And they say now that from 0 to 3 or 4, many things shape who you will become. So I think that start there in more peacefulness. And I think my family probably had plenty of hardship, but I was a little kid, so I didn't really know much about that. What I knew about was the stuff I talked about, the stuff that, being wondering how you kill a chicken, or why you kill a chicken for that matter. and Learning that the chicken in the yard is the one now on the table, and how that happened. I watched my aunt. I followed her around. How you milk a cow. I didn't know. I mean, those are just exciting to you when you're a little kid. I mean, the whole world is to be discovered, and I had a chance to develop that. So in those ways as a little kid, and it's really stood me in great stead, because I still am amazingly inquisitive and courageous in exploring those pathways that are not known to me. And I think I learned a lot about that from 0 to 5, walking and playing back and forth in the sand, and going from my house to where my grandfather lived. My grandfather made baskets, as I described in the book. And my grandfather always kept silver dollars in his pocket that he gave to us. So getting a silver dollar from him was a big treat. And you didn't ever know when you were going to get one. because he did, he was very mysterious about like they grew somewhere or something. But he
Oh,
died when I was in college and he was 103.
oh
And
my
he had
goodness.
been making baskets. And the only regret that I have from that era is that I don't have one of his baskets.
Mm, mm. So you have these rich roots and the wonderful, inquisitive, safe childhood, but then it's like poverty hits when your family moves, and that highway you had to cross every day, which
Yeah.
was foggy. It's a great example of the grinding nature, the threatening nature of poverty.
Mhm.
Explain to us more about what that was like when the sort of the fear sets in, and your daily living is not safe, is not, you have to get to school and you're risking your life. What was that like for you?
As I was writing that part, even as a 77-year-old grown up, I could feel that fear, that worry, and a child that got hit by a car. I felt the grief of that. I could still see her little body on the side of the road under a quilt, under a coat. It was very frightening. A lot of fear. I began to engage fear, and I had not known what fear was before. So that was, and then my whole life became laced with fear from then on. When we moved, some of you've maybe read the book, others will see this, and I don't want to say too much because I don't want you to think, well, I don't need to read it now. She told me everything. So, but when my mother took a teaching job that was 100 and something miles, close to 200 miles from the Walnut Grove, um, my first encounter with fear was my mother having to leave me with strangers because I was too young to go to school. And they became the babysitters while mama was teaching. And they were perfectly fine. They took good care of me. But when you're 5 years old and these are strangers, it didn't matter if they were God and Jesus, they still were the source of fear for me. So my mother would hang her coat on the door. And I would think at night, my plan was I'm going to wake up early enough in the morning so mama has to take me with her. But every time I would never wake up because she left too early. And when I woke up, her coat was gone.
Mm.
And then I would just lay in the bed and cry because I was scared. And that was my real first experience with being afraid because mama's gone. And I had my little plan to run away, but then I decided that I didn't know where to go. So I better hang around till she got back from school. And then it just went from that to other things. And then when we moved there on Highway 79, where the school was across the road from us, and I had to, as a bigger kid, as an older kid, as a 8, 10, well, 10, 11-year-old, had to walk across the highway to get to school. And I was really afraid of fog. I mean, you just didn't know who was going to be in the fog. I still don't like fog,
Yeah.
because it's like you're in it and you can't see anything, and then you see something because it's right out there, but you just can't see it. And so the fog in the highway, and then that child being killed, and then just one thing led to another. So I have spent a lot of dollars in psychotherapy working on this whole business of learning how not to be afraid. I think that's probably why I talk about courage so much.
Yeah, and Dr. Meeks, along with the fear, you say it so beautifully in the book, but you find yourself kind of silenced. It's like the beginning of this, your fear, you hold it inside for so long, and after your degrees, you begin to write about it. But tell us about how the fear and the silence are interwoven, especially in the case of race and oppression and poverty. How does that come about?
Well, when I was a little kid playing in Junction City, Arkansas, I didn't know that there were white people and black people. I mean, I'm sure I saw somebody. I don't think I stayed in that little space for 5 whole years, but it just didn't register. I mean, when you're a kid, There's just stuff you don't pay attention to. And so when I got older, I started to realize that there was this difference. There was something different about us than the people that owned the grocery store where we bought food. The ways in which we were treated, and after a while, something in your psyche starts to pick up a message that you don't have the words for.
Mm.
And I did not have the words for the fear. I didn't know what that was.
Mm.
And my parents weren't talking about that kind of stuff. I mean, they were too busy trying to survive. My mother was going to school. My father was an illiterate, I don't want to say illiterate, unlettered is what I try to say about my dad, because even though he could not read or write, he was a very smart man and a very good farmer. But my father was trying to make a living in a place where it was hard to make a living. So he worked as a janitor and then as a sharecropper. So there was always the scarcity in our house, the lack of things. We lived in a little 3-room house that was across the street from the school. And our school itself, because it was a Black school, suffered from the racist structure that brought us all the used stuff from the white school. So we had scarcity at school, we had scarcity at home. And I became very afraid that the world was too scarce to take care of me. Now, I know that now. Then all I knew was that I felt ill at ease. And it pushed me to getting up as a little kid and going sitting outside praying and asking God to take care of us. How I knew to ask God, don't ask me, I don't know. I just did. And I would ask God to take care of us. And God did, because here I sit, and my family survived. So, but when you have these feelings and thoughts, but no space, no invitation to even begin to understand it or talk about it, you just learn to keep your mouth shut. And I learned to keep my mouth shut. I didn't know what to say. I would not have known what to ask. I don't know what my parents, when I think about it, I don't even know what they could have said that would have made any difference. They did what they could do. They kept food on the table. They tried to keep clothes on our backs, and they kept us with shelter. And I'm deeply grateful for that, because that could have not been the case. And yet there was no conversation ever about race, except we have to be careful. Which is another part of the fear, that why do we have to be careful? Because if we're not careful, something bad will happen to us because we're not white. But they never said because we're not white. They just said we have to be careful. And I had to just learn to fill in the blanks myself.
What's interesting, Dr. Meeks, is your brother had a bit of a voice when you had that first kind of abusive relationship with a man. And I heard in your writing, he spoke to you very clearly about what you should not tolerate in a man.
Right.
And I was stunned by his protection and articulation of that truth to you. Tell us more about your brother, and how was it because he's of your generation, perhaps, that he had that awareness? How could he do that? I mean, that took incredible love, but also, he found a voice somehow to say that truth to you.
Well, my father was married before he married my mom. He was older than a pretty good many years older than my mom. So I had half brothers and sisters that were a good bit older than me, but we were raised together. So we just never made much to do out of that. We were a blended family. But my brother, Thomas, who was actually, Thomas and William were my favorite brothers, I have to confess. And Thomas was the one who I lived with him when I went out to California after graduating from high school in 1964. I went to live with him, and then I had my own apartment, and I got hooked up with this guy who thought you should punch out women. So he didn't stay around in my life long, partly because my brother said to me those very words, I am not going to be coming to get you from rescue you from some man abusing you. So you don't have to take that, and I'm not going to support you in it. One of my other sisters had abusive husbands, and so it was a really good word for him to say, I've been through this with one sister, I'm not going through it with another one. And it made me really clear-headed about, okay,
Mhm.
I'm not available to be abused. I never was, and I'm not, was not, and am not now, and never have been, and taught my children, you don't have to be abused. And if somebody tries to abuse you while you're kids, I am the buffer between you and that person who's trying to abuse you, because nobody deserves to be abused.
Mm.
And my brother had been in the Korean War, and I think he was just really clear about that he had fought for freedom, and he wasn't going to come back home and not be free, and he wasn't going to have his sisters be abused. And I'm thankful for that. I mean, he was always there. He was always my supporter and always a cheerleader, and very proud of me. And he too had to drop out of school when he was in the 6th grade. So he couldn't read and write that well, but he was also a genius. If he'd had a chance at education, I don't know what he would have done. He was an inventor and an amazing,
Mm.
amazing human being. So I miss him a lot.
Mm. What a beautiful family you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we
there was
we
some health.
were.
Yes, there
I'm
was some health
sorry.
in your there was good voices in your family, and then you also mentioned you somehow knew how to pray. And let's talk about your prayer life. You said you'd go out in the early morning and you would pray to God as a little girl. What was it about the early morning that drew your heart and soul outside?
Well, I still love the mornings. I think what I said in the book is I like to go out before the world and watch the world wake up.
Hmm.
There's something about watching the world wake up. But I think I learned from my father. My father would get up at daybreak and go walk when he had a little sharecropping gig where there's 6 acres of cotton, and then he had what they call truck patches and little vegetables and fruit and stuff, that watermelon, cantaloupes. And he was a good farmer, and he loved the earth, and he loved his things he was growing. And he would get up before daybreak and go walk. As soon as the sun's coming up, he's walking in the field to see what happened during the night to the plants. And I think, kids like to mimic their parents. And I think getting up early, Daddy got up early. I want to get up early because I was really little daddy's girl. And I wanted to get up early. And then what was I going to do? I would sit on the back door steps and watch just the daybreak, and watch the sun come up, and watch the birds. And I love clouds, and I'd watch the clouds. I had no idea who God was, but I thought there must be somebody bigger than me somewhere. And so nobody told me about God. I mean, I didn't start reading books about God till I got those. Some of you remember those old Bible story books that you used to find in doctor's offices? Somebody gave us some of those books, and I read all this stuff, particularly about Jesus, and it made me really like Jesus a lot. And so, has gotten me into a whole lot of trouble now that I'm older. But it's sort of like, how do you know when you're a little kid, maybe you're more connected to God than ever, and you don't, because you haven't had all this programming to think about God in ways that maybe don't even really fit you. So there was just something kind of innate about that. And I also think there was some need to escape the pain of the reality that I could not have put words to at that time. But the fear, the sense of it was really traumatic to be disconnected from the safety of my grandfather's walnut grove. But I didn't know, I didn't have any way to explain all that to myself. I had no idea. All I knew was how I felt. and I would get up and just talk. I mean, you know, I've come to realize that being a person of faith and prayer, I've given up. I love to say now, I don't have any intentions of trying to be holy. I'm just trying to make it through the day. And I will talk to God however I need to, like telling Jesus, you know, way back when my kids were teenagers, when was the last time you tried to raise two Black boys in Macon, Georgia, Jesus? So, you know, because this is the life I've got. So I think I have always felt that I had to talk to God about the life I had and the life, the things that were happening to me in my life. And then of course that has expanded some, but this, you know, just kind of, here I am, and you're there, and you're bigger than me, and you know more than I do, and you've got more power than me. So I'm here and I need help or whatever. So I'm expecting you to show up. That's kind of how I was living. But I would, if you had asked me any of these questions back then, I would not have had any answer. I wouldn't have even known really what you were talking about, because I was just getting up, sitting out there talking to God and watching the birds and the clouds and the sun come up.
You know, it strikes me that your father, when he walked the land like that in the early morning, was listening. He was looking at the land and watching and listening.
Right.
And maybe that's what you were doing too, is just before you could speak with a voice, you listened to God's voice. It's a good way to start finding your voice.
Right.
Yeah.
And my father didn't go to church, but I think my father was much more connected to God than I probably thought when I was younger. Now
Mhm.
that I think back over his life, because that getting up early, going walking like that, and looking at the
Mhm.
plants, and I don't know what he had to say. He used to sing a lot. He sang
Mhm.
the old spirituals. That was what I remember Daddy doing. He also
Mhm.
let me sit on his lap and read to him, even though he could not read and
How
did not know
beautiful.
whether I was reading correctly. It didn't really matter, because the only thing that mattered was that he was listening to me read. And
Mhm.
so I read my little books to him. And I know that he must be really proud of the person I have become. And he had a lot to do with it, though he was not like my mother, struggling to get an education. My mother graduated from college the year that I graduated from high school.
Wow.
And so I learned a lot from her about the value of education. I learned a lot from my father about the value of paying attention and
Mhm.
listening and loving the earth. You
Mhm.
know, really important lessons, all of them.
All of them, yeah. You know, because of your loving childhood, when you get into working and you encounter in your book some really toxic work situations, and you paid attention to your own pain and struggle, and you were able to identify the fact that it was unhealthy, the environment in which you were working. How
Mhm.
did you, how was it because of that healthy family, do you think, that you could have that awareness? You didn't tolerate toxicity in the workplace. A lot of people can't identify it or don't know how to, or they think maybe
Yeah.
there's something wrong with themselves. How did you get to a place where you were able to do that?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I don't always know. I mean, I just, there is a part of me that has resisted oppression,
Hmm.
whether it's somebody trying to oppress me in the workplace or outside of the workplace. The disrespect, denigration, marginalization, those are things that I have an innate resistance to. And so I think that when people were unkind or cruel, really, in some instances, that there's that, it's like you have a filter that says, oh yeah, that can't be, you can't let this go without doing something. You have to acknowledge this. I was not always that good at it at times. It would take me sometimes longer than it should have, to realize what was happening and to make sure I wanted to stand up for myself. but I did manage a lot to stand up for myself. And it was not always easy. And I stayed afraid a lot. And, but I was given the grace to act in spite of fear. And I think that's part of what you have to have if you want to not to accept abuse, and toxic workplaces are abusive. And I worked in Macon, Georgia, in the mental health world, and that was a job that was incredibly fraught with toxicity around race, around class, around gender. And there I was, this Black woman in
Wow.
this place, and the only Black staff member for a good long time. But that was not easy. But I feel like I learned a lot of things, and I have no regrets about the lessons at all.
And while you were in that space, there were so many things that happened to you that one at a time wouldn't seem so bad, and yet they became
Yeah.
so life-threatening in some ways. I mean, the depression that you experienced. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how it is for Black people who are being treated that way? How it's kind of like water dripping on a rock or something. It breaks you
Yeah.
down. Yeah.
Well, it is. It's difficult, and it's wounding, but you don't spend all your time thinking about it, or else you become completely immobilized and you can't live. And so I did not do that. But it did lead me, when I was working at the mental health center, I did know that I had to get out of there. I was going to die if I didn't get out of there, because it was depressing to be in Macon, Georgia, for one thing, pretty much by myself, though I had a couple of friends, but I was mostly by myself, away from my family. I was ill some. I did get ill, and now I understand how that's related to psychological things that are happening to you, to have physical breakdowns in your body. So it was a hard time, but I discovered Howard Thurman during some of that time, and Howard Thurman has become one of my most important teachers. So, and discovered my own capacity to survive in a way that I had never known before. And also watched God deliver me from there. I went from there to Memphis to work for a while, and I was just in Memphis this past weekend, and did a little bit of, my father died in Memphis, and we stayed in the Lorraine Motel when my father was there sick. So I did a little pilgrimage while I was there this weekend, which really struck a few pieces of grief that I didn't know still existed around all that. And my brother Thomas, that I talked about a minute ago, and I were the ones who were staying with my father, and we stayed in the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was killed, I guess, as most of you know. That's now his museum. But it was real important to me to go on that journey, to go back but to the old hospital site, and to go to the hotel, and to just kind of live again in my memory what it was like to be there, and think about my father at there and his death. He was there for a little over a week after having a stroke. So I think I gained strength from not running from things. I think that was the biggest. I think if I had to try to put encapsulate this, I would say I learned not to run from things. I learned that if you keep walking, you just got to keep going. You have to stay intentional, and you have to know where you're trying to go, so you can keep going in that direction. And then you just see, God will meet you. My belief is that God will meet you on that path, that you will get the things you need somehow to survive, or you'll die. I mean, either way, sometimes people don't get what they need and they end up dying. I could have killed myself at some points because of the depression, but then you get to a point where if you didn't kill yourself, then it was too late. You can't go back. Now you got to keep going forward. Like we laugh about when you're getting a PhD, there's a point when you get so far, you want to throw the whole thing away and kill your professors, but you know, your only real thing you need to do is graduate. You know,
Right.
you need to keep going to get to graduation because you have invested so much in the whole process that it would be more than stupid not to graduate.
Mm,
So it was sort of that way with my life. After a while, it would have been more than stupid not to keep going forward,
mhm.
not to keep on trying, not to keep on seeing, not to keep on trusting and trusting that God would unfold the next thing I needed to do. And that's been true now for all these years, that intention, that kind of commitment to keep going even in the dark has been met with the light. And
Mm.
I'm so grateful for that affirmation.
Yeah, yeah. Eileen Phelps writes in the chat that it's a very good point about being intentional, and I agree with that. You talk about not dwelling on the prejudice, but at the same time acknowledging it and acknowledging that you needed more support, that you needed to get out of there.
Mhm.
How do you manage that balance between, acknowledging the darkness, but yet not getting
Right.
sucked into it to the place where you lose all hope?
You know, I think a lot of it's grace, as I've just said. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna sit here and pretend there's nothing easy about it.
Mhm.
It's hard. It's grace that keeps you believing you can even survive it, I think. But I do think that telling the truth to yourself, letting yourself see the truth and owning it, even when you can't do anything about changing it, is important. And I've learned to do that. It's been hard, and it's still sometimes hard because I don't like to know what the truth is about some stuff because I want it to be easier and simpler, but it's not. So I think that one of the things in terms of race, I think that Black people have got to, and other people of color as well, but since I'm Black, I focus on that more, have got to be willing to tell the truth about how we've been wounded and injured, and but not to let that become a reason for not being who God put us on the earth to be.
Mm.
Just because those things have happened doesn't mean that I get to camp out and do nothing but lick my wounds. I need to own them, acknowledge them, and not allow myself to be re-wounded without at least naming that that's what's happened, trying to happen. But I also don't need to get immobilized. And that's a real dance because there's a real temptation to just sit down somewhere and say, forget it.
Yeah.
It's not worth the struggle because the struggle doesn't seem to ever end. It hasn't ended. Here I am. In a week, I'll be 78 years old. And a lot of the same stuff that I confronted as a 20-year-old is still out there to be dealt with. So that could cause me to say, well, why bother? But I know that I have to stay intentional.
Mm, mm. Thank you for that. And, your work with the Absalom Jones Center, I know you've recently retired from that work, but would you tell us a little bit about how you felt called to serve in that capacity? You really took that center to a national level, and your leadership was
Right.
quite prophetic. So how did that
Mhm.
come to pass?
Well, it's a bit of a long story. I volunteered for a while in the Diocese of Atlanta, heading the Dismantling Racism Commission, and we kind of outgrew ourselves as a volunteer group, and we inquired of the presiding bishop if he would be interested in helping to start a center in Atlanta that I would direct that would move us beyond just doing those day-long workshops, the dismantling racism workshops that we do. And I was really clear about the fact that we needed to do that work with integrity, with more integrity, and we needed to be more creative and imaginative, and we
Mm.
needed to keep saying yes, and we needed to be inclusive. And I had this pretty good sized vision for how I thought the work should go. And I set about doing it. And I have to say, I worked 60 to 70 hours a week running that center, and I don't miss it because it was
Yeah,
too much
too
work.
much work.
I
Yeah.
started it when I was 70. So, and
Wow.
people would say, where do you get the energy? Well, I got the energy from saying yes to what I was called to do. That's where the energy comes from.
Mm.
And it actually became international because we worked a lot in Province 9, particularly in Honduras and the Dominican Republic,
Oh,
which
wow.
is oftentimes not so well attended to by our church.
Mm.
But it was grace and skill and my own passion and the coming together too of a lot of my ideas and thoughts and ways to do things. I'm very proud of the work that I did there. I'm very proud of it because it took a lot of courage
Mhm.
to do that work and to go into, I mean, I went all over the country. I am now a gold medallion member of Delta, and that would have never happened if I hadn't been doing the Absalom Jones Center, because that's how much I traveled. And I wasn't interested that much in traveling, but it was important to travel and to try to spread the word. I felt like that we were so missing the boat by never talking about racial healing. We always want to talk about reconciliation. We want to talk about dismantling racism. We want to talk about everything, but the necessity for us to be reworked inside to
Mm.
get to a place where we really can be accepting of all of God's children. And it's good enough to tell people, see the face of God in folks. Well, how can you see the face of God in people when you don't even see the face of God in yourself?
Yeah.
You're only gonna see in others as to whatever point you've got the courage to look at yourself. And there's a lot of projecting of stuff that we don't want to look at. And so I felt like I had a message that needed to be heard in that regard. It's about inner healing and outer healing. And so much of the work around race is always on the outer stuff. We're
Mm.
always ready to go fix something out there, rather than what's inside of me that's helping that out there to stay manifested. It's a very important question. And it was my willingness to raise that, to ask that question. I was really shocked by the numbers of people, clergy and lay alike, who had never thought of racial healing as a part of spiritual formation.
Wow.
It's a part of us, of our spiritual formation, to be open, to be healed about our inability to relate to people that are different from us. I mean, that's a spiritual issue
Absolutely.
because God made everybody. So you either got to deal with that or tell yourself that there's a whole bunch of gods making different people. And it's easier for me to work on what keeps me from relating than it is to believe in a multiplicity of gods. I just want to have one, actually. And
Amen to
so,
that. Yeah.
but that is where it takes you. You either got to say that this God made everybody, thus everybody deserves to be loved and taken care of. And how do I deal with the things in me that frighten me so much that I can't see you as a person and see God in you? What does that have to do with me? And that's what that center, that's the kind of question that center's foundation was built on. And that's the core of the message that I've been given to share with people. That it's about getting ourselves well. Like Howard Thurman says, we're getting ourselves out of prison.
Yes. Yes.
We're getting ourselves out of prison. And
Yeah.
I want to say, all of my life, I've been working on being a liberated, free human being, getting myself out of prison, whatever that has meant. And that's been, and I've somehow been given the courage to stay with that task.
Mm. Mm. Wow. Well, someone wrote in the chat, do you still get up before sunrise and talk or listen to God?
No, I'm too lazy. 8 years old is a lot more anxious to see daylight than the 77-year-old.
Yes.
But what I do is I'm getting ready to start back. I've done this a lot, is take a day to go be silent.
Mm.
So I'm starting back actually this week. Well, I started a little bit with having a half day of being away, going away to my church. We have a little chapel at my church, and I'm gonna go spend a half day being there, being silent, because I believe silence is such an important teacher
Yes.
and facilitator of healing. And I've been too busy in some ways with the center and all of that, and it's time to do some regrouping. So I'm gonna be going every Thursday for a while to spend at least a half day. I used to spend a whole day, but I haven't done it in a while, so I don't want to be grandiose. So I'm gonna go start out, you know, with a half day, and I may get to being able to get up earlier. I've been working to my work schedule has caused me to have very erratic, stay up too late and then getting up running to do this, that, and the other. And it's so I'm working on getting back on a better, somebody said about self-care. Yeah. If I'm gonna, I say you should practice what you're preaching. And if I'm gonna preach taking care of yourself, I better be trying to take care of myself. So I'm
Good for
I'm
you.
working on that. That's
Good for you.
my next this year's challenge is getting
Trying
back
to care for
more to that.
yourself. Right.
Yeah.
So we have a question here that, why is it that we focus so much more on the outer and ignore our inner life? Is that because we've felt threatened?
Well, I think it's because we have been told by the culture that the outer trappings matter more than the quality of the human being. We're so concerned about where did you go to school, where do you live, how much money do you have, who are your people, what's the that external stuff that's really important, but not nearly as important as what's in your heart.
Hmm.
You know, what I want to know is what's in your heart. I don't really want to, I mean, where you went to school, that's fine. You can tell me if you feel like it, but I'm more interested in what do you believe? What are you willing to stand up for? And how can we connect around those things? And so I think that the culture has taught us to be quite frank, to be ego-centered rather than really connected to the ego and the persona, to have our internal life and our external life to be in conversation and concert with each other is not what the culture promotes. It promotes the quick stuff. Let me see who you are. What box can I put you in?
Hmm.
And then I know how to relate to you, rather than I don't know how to relate to you yet till I talk to you a little bit, you know, and find out that, hey, we really are kin because you care about these things and you worry about those things. And I find some places there where I can connect to you, rather than I can't connect to you because you went to Harvard and I went to community college.
Yeah.
You know, the culture though is so reinforcing of that. And then and it is also fear, you know, how much do we want people to know who we are? And how much do we want to know ourselves about who we are? Because we've made up the story and now we need to keep the story going. So this interrogation that I'm talking about is really kind of, you know, it's upending. If you keep asking questions, you'll get to some answers you wish you hadn't gotten to.
That's true.
But you'll be, but you know what Jesus said about that the truth will set you free.
Amen.
So then the truth about me, the truth about the culture, the truth about history, all of it will set us free. But we would sometimes rather choose not to be free than to know the truth, I think.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I know that we are close to the top of the hour, and I know Catherine Bissett, our bookstore manager, wanted to say a few words of thanks before ending our conversation. Dr. Meeks, it is such a joy to talk to you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And for those of you who had questions that didn't get answered, I'm sorry about that if you had questions, but I'm so grateful that you came to be here and to listen. And I hope that my words and the words of the book, if you choose to buy it and read it, will be a joy to you and encourage you in all the things that God is asking you to do.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meeks. You just this is a very special backstory, one that I'll remember forever. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. So
Thanks everyone for joining us today for BackStory. And we want to thank Dr. Meeks especially for being with us today, and also Jason Pearson with Erdman's Publishing for helping us coordinate this event. And we want to thank the Bishops Institute and Douglas Dupree for support of today's program. And as Sandy mentioned, we do have copies of Dr. Meeks' wonderful book, A Quilted Life, available for purchase in the bookstore. And we would thank everyone who would continue to support our ministry and programming. Thanks, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
thank you all.
God bless you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
God bless you, Dr. Meeks. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.